You know what grills my cheese? So, Transformers. Massive franchise with tons of iconic characters, and my favorite of them all is Shockwave, the one-eyed, purple Decepticon operations expert and scientist. So as we all know, in 2007, Paramount released the first ever live-action Transformers film. It was so wildly successful that it revamped the image of Transformers in the public eye and spawned sequels. With the release of the first two films, we had gotten a look at some of the franchise's most popular characters in live action, including some of the franchise's most popular villains, such as Megatron, Starscream, and Soundwave, to name a few. However, Shockwave was still absent. Then came the third film, Transformers Dark of the Moon, which told us that Shockwave was here at last, and I was just beyond excited to see him. But when I finally saw the film, I thought Shockwave was fucking awesome! I loved Dark of the Moon Shockwave so much, and I still do to this day. Like, I really loved this Shockwave. Maybe even too much. Anyway, I went online to see if others loved him in the movie just as much as I did, and I was surprised to see that they didn't. I saw some say that he was weak, wasted, underused, and killed by a parachute, among other things, and many seem to share these same thoughts. So, I am here today to come to the defense of Shockwave in Transformers Dark of the Moon, to explain why I believe that not only was he used well, but he was actually a great adaptation of the character of Shockwave. I understand that this may be a bit of an uphill battle for me, but all I ask is that you hear out this whole video and every point I have to make before you make a final decision. My goal with this video is to hopefully show you why Shockwave in Transformers Dark of the Moon was excellent when it is commonly believed that he was not. And even if you still don't agree with me on that by the end of this video, then I hope you will still at least be able to understand my reasoning as to why I have come to this conclusion. Now, if you do already agree with me that Shockwave was great in Transformers Dark of the Moon, firstly, hell yeah, but I encourage you to still stay around anyway, as I may point out some things that make him even better to you. And if you are someone who currently frowns upon this portrayal of Shockwave, and I do manage to change your mind on him for the better by the end of this video, please let me know in the comments, because if I see that I managed to change at least one person's mind on Shockwave and Transformers Dark of the Moon for the better, I will be ecstatic. Anyway, let's begin. Alright, so I'm just going to start by addressing one of the biggest complaints I see for Shockwave in Transformers Dark of the Moon, that being his screen time, or lack thereof. See, Shockwave has around maybe a little over 2 minutes of screen time in the film, and some feel this wasn't nearly enough. Now, unlike most of anything else I'm going to say in this video, the screen time is not something I can argue with, for obvious reasons. The length of time he is in the film is factual and absolutely definitive. Would I have liked for Shockwave to have more screen time in the movie? Hell yeah! Of course I'd be all for even more Shockwave screen time in the film. But the short amount of screen time he's given in the film as is just doesn't bother me, because of just how much Shockwave manages to pull off in such a short amount of time. Which really is a major part of what this video is going to focus on. How much Shockwave does, and what he does in such a limited amount of screen time. Worth mentioning that another reason I'm not disappointed by Shockwave's lack of screen time in the film is kind of because, as a Shockwave fan, I'm just used to him having a lack of screen time. Like, let's be honest, Shockwave usually gets the butt end of the stick when it comes to screen time in just about everything he's in. It's been like this from the very beginning. Like, look at the original Transformers show. Let's even only consider just seasons 1 and 2 here, as later seasons focused around new characters, and Shockwave is dead at that point. Taking into account the runtimes of those 2 seasons worth of episodes, a whole 65 episodes in total, we get around 24 hours, a whole day's worth of Transformers television. And of that roughly 24 hours worth of 65 episodes, Shockwave only gets about half an hour of screen time? That's not even 2 full episodes worth. For another example, Transformers Animated. 42 episodes across 3 seasons, each episode being about 22 minutes in length. That's about a little over 15 hours of total runtime, and Shockwave gets about 1 episode's worth of screen time across the whole show. Transformers Prime, 65 episodes across 3 seasons, each episode being around 22 minutes long. That's about 24 hours, another day's worth of runtime. And Shockwave gets about only an episode and a half worth of screen time in all of that. Point being, Shockwave and lack of screen time go hand in hand. It's unfortunate, yes, but it just should be expected when it comes to this character, for better or for worse. So if you keep all of that in mind, it shouldn't bother you too much, or at least surprise you, that Shockwave doesn't end up with a whole lot of screen time in Transformers Dark of the Moon. It's also worth mentioning that I find the heavy criticism I see these films get for their characters not getting a lot of screen time to be rather unfair as a whole, for the most part anyway. I mean, yeah, no shit they don't get a lot of screen time. This isn't like one of the shows where animated Transformers are interacting with animated humans in an animated environment. These are real-life sets and locations with real people being filmed that the animators have to make super realistic, well-animated, CGI giant robots navigate around and interact with. It costs tons of money. This is just an unfortunate staple of live-action Transformers. It's a lot of money and a lot of work to pull off the Transformers in live action. They're not going to have a lot of screen time. Of course, you can cut down the amount of characters you have in a film in order to be able to afford to give some others more screen time, or lower the quality of their CGI to do more with them, but Transformers usually has tons of characters clashing all at once, and the franchise was known for its stellar CGI effects, and to get that in live action, some screen time is going to have to be cut for some of the characters. Either the Transformers get less screen time and have better CGI, or they lower the quality of the CGI and amount of characters so they can get more screen time with the characters they can afford. And honestly, I feel either of those arguments is justified. Well, we've established that Shockwave is a character who doesn't often get a lot of screen time in mostly anything he's in, and that giving Transformers characters a lot of screen time in live action is quite a challenge, especially in a film like Dark of the Moon that has tons of characters in it to animate already. Because of these reasons, I think the amount of screen time in the film Shockwave gets can be forgiven, especially when you take into consideration just how much he pulls off in such a limited amount of screen time with his role in the film. But before we get into his characterization in the film, I'd like to briefly comment about his design. Now, I've seen some people take issue with Shockwave's design in this film, and as for me, personally, I gotta say, I think this design is fucking awesome! Oh my god! This is my favorite thing ever, in the history of forever. This is the greatest redesign of a character I've ever seen. He looks so intimidating and badass. Each and every detail here is amazing. The fact that they kept his traditional purple color, which looks great here, his ear panels being reimagined to look more like horns, his giant cannon, it all looks so damn incredible! Did Josh Nizzi get a raise for designing such a masterpiece of a character design? Did the folks at ILM get a raise for spending over 30 weeks creating his CGI model and bringing this design to life? They absolutely should have! I honestly cannot believe people will look at this design and decide they don't like it. Yet, there are people who decide such a thing for whatever reasons. Look, I get that everyone is entitled to their own opinion, so if you don't like this design, that's perfectly okay. But I just want to let you know that you're wrong. Okay, seriously, I rarely see people complain about this design, and I've only seen mainly 2 reasons that people who don't like this design give for not liking it. One of those reasons being that this Shockwave has a mouth. Now, usually I would be against the idea of Shockwave having a mouth. Part of the appeal of Shockwave's character as a whole is that his face shows zero expression, for obvious reasons, and therefore he shows very little emotion, helping to make him a cold and intimidating villain. However, the reason that this Shockwave having a mouth actually works for me in this instance is the way they worked it into his look. See, it's not like a normal mouth. It's rather small and sideways, unable to actually emote. He can emote with this mouth as much as other Shockwaves without mouths can emote, which is not at all. And it's because of this that the mouth doesn't ruin the design for me in the slightest. Anyway, the next reason I've seen some people who don't like this design say they don't like it is because his cannon is on his right arm instead of being on his left as it typically is. Now, frankly, I myself honestly could not give less of a shit about this. But if I were to defend this design choice anyway, I want to say that this is a design characteristic that was carried over from Transformers Animated. See, Transformers Animated was one of the most recent Transformers shows at the time that Transformers Dark of the Moon went into production, and we've seen that some characteristics from Transformers Animated had influence on some characters in not only Transformers Dark of the Moon, but also later films as well. For example, in Transformers Animated, Soundwave is short and stocky, has speakers on his arms, and becomes a car. In Transformers Dark of the Moon, Soundwave is short and stocky, has speakers on his arms, and becomes a car. In Transformers Animated, Lockdown is slim, has a hook, is covered in dark colors including a dark green, has beef with Ratchet, and collects various things. In Transformers Age of Extinction, Lockdown is slim, has a hook, is covered in dark colors including a dark green, has beef with Ratchet, and collects various things. See what I mean? So with that being said, in Transformers Animated, even though this time the cannon wasn't actually part of his arm and was rather just handheld, Shockwave would still often wield a giant cannon with his right arm, just like how in Transformers Dark of the Moon, Shockwave wields a giant cannon that is actually just part of his right arm. So yes, the cannon being on his right arm instead of his left arm is accurate to some source material. And if you're one of those people where your overall complaint about this design is simply that it's new and isn't merely just a live-action G1 design, then can I please ask you to just open your mind to new things? Look, here's my stance on character redesigns, okay? I don't care if a character redesign isn't 100% accurate to the source material. As long as the redesign is fun, creative, interesting, etc., and fits the character it's supposed to be, I won't have a problem with it. For an example, how about the Mandarin? The Mandarin from Iron Man Armored Adventures doesn't really look like comic Mandarin at all, but I don't care, because this design is really creative, it's fun, and it fits the character. Meanwhile, MCU Mandarin also doesn't really look like comic Mandarin, but in this case, I find his design to be really dull, boring, and generic, so I'm not a big fan of it. Anyway, this is my stance on character redesigns, though I do encourage you to take on a similar stance if you don't already, because I find that it encourages creativity instead of just getting the same thing over and over and over again. Alright, I gotta get back on track. So now that we've discussed Shockwave's screen time and design, let's address his characterization in Dark of the Moon. A lot of complaints I see about this Shockwave say that he just didn't fit the character of Shockwave, as some claim that he wasn't depicted as being as smart as Shockwave typically should be, but rather too brutish, and that he was overall just weak. I'd actually argue the exact opposite, as this Shockwave came across to me as being just as big brain as the character should be, as well as being one of the most powerful incarnations of Shockwave we've ever seen, and he manages to convey all of this within his limited screen time, which is part of what makes him so impressive to me. To show why I believe all this to be true, I'm going to go through and analyze several scenes and aspects from the film that show just how smart and powerful this Shockwave actually is. To start off with the matter of his intelligence, as I said, this Shockwave is actually really big brain, just as he should be. This also applies to the scientist nature of the character, of course. Now, due to what the film is about, we don't see Shockwave perform any elaborate experiments, but even so, people will tell you that there's no evidence that Shockwave in this film is a scientist. As if the guy doesn't control a giant driller bot creature that he himself even modified by adding a cockpit into the creature's body for him to ride around and operate in, all without damaging the overall strength and mobility of the creature. Messing around with bizarre creatures for experiments is nothing new for the character of Shockwave, and it's right on display here for us. Look, just don't tell me that there is no evidence for this Shockwave being a scientist when there is literally over 1,000 feet of evidence to the contrary in the film.
But Blotswave, if this Shockwave is really so smart, then how come he just speaks in alien gibberish?
That's another complaint I've heard a lot as well, and honestly, after I thought it over, I gotta say, Shockwave speaking mostly in alien rather than English or some other Earth language not only makes sense, but is actually another sign of his intelligence as well. Because, like, why would Shockwave speak in an Earth language like English? Speaking English would mean that humans would be able to understand him. This serves him absolutely no benefit considering humans are his enemy. Why speak in a language your enemy can understand, possibly giving them the means to figure out what you're up to and what you're planning, when you can just speak in your planet's native language where only your kind would understand you? Yeah, the Autobots can understand him, but there's far fewer of them than there are humans out there that are trying to help them stop him and the Decepticons. The advantage that speaking his native language gives him is that far fewer of his enemies can understand him and what he's up to. I know he speaks a few understandable words at times, such as but that isn't anything critical. Also, some people believe that they can hear Shockwave speak English in some other scenes too, but these lines people think they may be hearing are not confirmed by subtitles like the others have been, at least not that I know of anyway. You know, Frank Welker, who voices Shockwave in this film if you somehow didn't know, will never not be one of the most incredible voice actors ever. The man gave Shockwave such an intense, intimidating voice. It makes what is mostly incoherent alien language speech sound super imposing and threatening. Would I have preferred Shockwave to speak understandable English? Yeah, I mean I would like to have known what he was saying, but as is, the speaking alien bit makes sense to me, and Frank Welker is Frank Welker regardless. Oh, speaking of, have you ever wondered where this alien dialogue came from anyway? Were the writers just handing Mr. Welker a page of gibberish? Were these sounds he made up on the spot? Well, at a recent TFCon, I got to ask Mr. Welker this very thing, and here's what he said.
Quick question. How did you do his voice? Because he speaks mostly alien. Like, did they give you a script, or did you just make up? Did you make up gibberish on the spot, or?
Pretty much just gibberish on the spot.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right.
Mr. Welker just confirmed that most of Shockwave's dialogue in the film was just gibberish that they had him make up on the spot, which they would then label as his native alien language. Now, moving on from his voice, let's address Shockwave's role in Transformers Dark of the Moon, and how he continues time and time again to prove not only his intelligence, but also the fact that he is a ruthless, formidable villain as well. Starting right off towards the beginning of the film, in his very first appearance, Shockwave flat out causes the entire movie to happen. So, Optimus Prime and Ratchet are with Nest, heading into Chernobyl because an informant named Voskod had told Colonel Lennox of Nest that some form of Cybertronian technology, which happens to be a fuel cell from the Autobot ship the Ark, had been found there, which they go to investigate. What the two Autobots and Nest don't know is that they are walking into a setup, and Voskod is actually working for the Decepticons, and was told by Laserbeak, who was told by Soundwave, who was told by Megatron, to make this arrangement. But why did Megatron have this arranged anyway? It had to come at the request of Shockwave, making all of this his idea. See, Megatron has been in Africa ever since the end of Revenge of the Fallen, which means he's been there for about 3 or 4 years. There, we see that he's not actively involving himself with any major Decepticon operations like he used to. He's just casually going about his business knowing that Shockwave has this current major operation covered. This leads me to believe that Shockwave planned this setup entirely, since he would have had to arrange when the Autobots and Nest would visit Chernobyl based on when he managed to arrive there with his driller bot. Megatron knows that what Shockwave is arranging will help him in the end, so he's just letting Shockwave do his own thing and waiting for a result. Megatron merely had Laserbeak go along so that, once Shockwave figures out the timing for the operation, he can inform Voskod on what to do and when to do it, observe the operation, and report back to him so that he wouldn't be left in the dark, and would be able to advance into the next part of the overall scheme. It just goes to show Shockwave's genius planning capabilities, but we're not done yet. The way Shockwave accomplishes setting up the Autobots and Nest is also genius. See, he knows he has to make it look like he wants the fuel cell, so that way the Autobots don't figure out that he actually wants them to take it. Okay, so try to stay with me here. See, by taking the fuel cell, the Autobots will realize it's from the Autobot ship the Ark, leading them to discover the location of the Ark, and therefore find an inactive Sentinel Prime, which is what the Decepticons want because they need Sentinel Prime for their space bridge plan, but only Optimus can revive him because he has the only thing that can revive him, that thing being the Matrix of Leadership. Shockwave knows all of this. All of those pieces falling into place relies on him successfully pulling off this task of letting the Autobots take the fuel cell from him without them realizing that's what he actually wants them to do and avoiding any kind of suspicion. To accomplish this, once the Autobots and Nest arrive at Chernobyl and find the fuel cell, Shockwave uses his driller bot to grab the part and then begins to flee the scene, giving the illusion to Nest and the Autobots that he wants to leave the area with the fuel cell. On his way out though, Shockwave then has the driller bot run into Optimus, provoking him and the Nest soldiers to engage the driller bot in combat, and since it is now in combat, it gives Shockwave an excuse to have the driller bot use its arm things to fight back, giving the illusion to Nest and the Autobots that it's defending itself, instead of making it look like it just outright wants to attack them. So, now that Shockwave is having the driller bot use its arms to attack, he can swing one Prime's way, one that happens to be holding the fuel cell. Optimus cuts the end of the arm off, causing it to drop the fuel cell on the ground. See, if Shockwave were to have the driller just outright drop the part randomly, it may have aroused suspicion, so in order to make sure that no one suspects anything, by swinging an arm holding the fuel cell out Prime's way, giving him an opportunity to cut the end of the arm off, it gives the illusion that him losing the fuel cell was entirely unintentional. And, now that the driller bot has been injured, it gives Shockwave an excuse to leave without trying to get the fuel cell back, and without making it look like he's just suspiciously leaving without a fight and making an effort to retrieve the fuel cell, as a natural assumption to those witnessing this would be that he's leaving in favor of the injured driller bot, to get it out of harm's way, prevent it from taking further damage, and to go off and get it fixed as soon as possible. But Blotswave, why wouldn't Shockwave just leave the part where it was? Wouldn't the Autobots and Ness have ended up with the fuel cell anyway if Shockwave didn't even show up at Chernobyl? Fair question to ask, but you have to keep something in mind. The Decepticons have been on the down low ever since the Fallen was defeated in Egypt around 3 or 4 years ago. The film establishes that the Autobots and Nest have been on edge about this and are concerned over this lack of Decepticon activity.
Energon detectors guard its cities now. Long-range defense systems watch the skies. And all the while, we search for signs of our true enemy's return.
Now, wouldn't it be a little suspicious if an engine part from an important Cybertronian ship was just randomly found, having actually been on Earth for decades, and your enemies, who you haven't seen in years, had seemingly never came across it and were nowhere to be found at its location? Especially when you know that one of these enemies, Soundwave, has extremely good spy skills and has used these skills in the past to obtain incredibly important confidential information from you. Shockwave showing up here creates the illusion that he's trying to steal the fuel cell, giving the impression to the Autobots and Nest that the Decepticons were indeed aware of the fuel cell's existence. And since Shockwave seems to try to escape with the fuel cell for himself, this removes any kind of possible suspicion that the Autobots and Nest may have that they are walking into a possible Decepticon trap. Everything all went exactly the plan, as after Optimus cuts the driller bot's arm off and causes it to drop the fuel cell, Shockwave leaves. Everyone lowers their guard and doesn't seem suspicious at all. They're a bit at ease, feeling that the threat is gone, now assessing the fuel cell that was left behind, all without realizing that this is what Shockwave wanted them to do the whole time. Do you see how brilliant this all is on Shockwave's part? Shockwave himself has only had a mere 2 seconds of screen time so far, and he's already managed to outsmart our heroes by having an apparent ally lead them to an engine part that he actually wants them to take, so he pretends to try to steal it, purposely allowing his driller bot to get harmed so that he can retreat without suspicion and leave the part for the heroes, setting them on a course of fulfilling his faction's every wish without a single one of them even suspecting it. This is exactly what I want from a Shockwave. An imposing yet brilliant enemy, able to use his intellect to outsmart all of his opponents with ease, with said opponents not realizing he's outsmarted them until it's too late. Oh yeah, did I mention that Shockwave gets his own theme in this movie as well? And let me tell you, Steve Jablonsky always absolutely cooks with the soundtracks for these movies, and Shockwave's theme is no exception. It's bold, epic, and intimidating, and perfectly captures Shockwave's character. I love it. Anyway, so we've addressed Shockwave's first appearance in the film, where he causes the movie to happen. But after this, he disappears for a long while, since he already set the plan into motion and just had to sit back and let all the pieces fall into place. And fall into place they do. The Autobots take the bait, they retrieve Sentinel, Optimus uses the Matrix to revive Sentinel, Sentinel pulls an Instruments of Destruction reference, escapes with his space bridge pillars, unites with Megatron, has a Decepticon army come to Earth through his space bridge portal, the Decepticons invade Chicago, the Autobots are seemingly destroyed, and so on and so on. Now, it's important to note that this film has a few main antagonists, namely Megatron and Sentinel Prime, but I'd also go so far as to say that it has a third, Shockwave. See, after all of the fallout of Shockwave's actions play out, and the Decepticons end up taking control of Chicago, the film reaches a point where two of its main antagonists, Megatron and Sentinel Prime, just stand on top of a building for a while, waiting for the pillars to be readied in order to activate the space bridge. Man, the two main antagonists are just kinda waiting around on a building. If only we had another major villain who was introduced earlier that could step in right now to be a constant major threat to our heroes. Oh shit, Yeah, Shockwave becomes this film's core antagonist from now until his death. From the moment he shows back up to the moment Optimus Prime takes him down, he continues to prove himself to be a potent, ruthless enemy, the kinds of which we hadn't exactly seen in this film series yet, nor would we exactly see again. Allow me to continue my analysis of him and his actions in the film to explain myself here. At the point in the film where the Autobots are heading into Decepticon-controlled Chicago, we haven't seen Shockwave since the Chernobyl scene where he caused all this to happen to begin with, which has caused some to beg the question, where has he been? Of course, he had to travel on his driller bot, presumably underground, from Chernobyl all the way to Chicago. But surely he would have been there by now, right? What is he doing? Just waiting underground? Actually, yes, and it makes perfect sense. Again, allow me to remind you that since he set this all into motion, there hasn't been a necessity for him to appear. Shockwave waits underground because he knows that there was no major need for him to hang around the city with Megatron or Sentinel. They've got the whole operation covered. Still, he's a powerful Decepticon, sure, but why would he be needed at the surface anyway? The Decepticons aren't fighting anyone. Any attempts from the military to get into Chicago are shot down with ease. There's no urgency for Shockwave's firepower and intelligence at the moment. Not yet, anyway. So, the more sensible thing for Shockwave to do was to stay hidden and out of sight underground in his driller bot, so that in case any enemies actually do make it into the city, he could take them by surprise, immediately attacking them with his immense strength and massive driller bot. Which he does. When Sam and Bumblebee help Carly escape from Dylan and kill Laserbeak, Dylan frantically yells to Megatron that the Autobots are alive and have made it into the city. Megatron announces to all the Decepticons that the enemy is here and that they need to find them. This means Shockwave would be aware of the present Autobot threat if he wasn't already, and could locate them and take them by surprise. Which he certainly does, and here he once again displays his intelligence. He knows from his earlier encounter with Optimus Prime back in Chernobyl that Optimus Prime's trailer is loaded with weapons. So, the most sensible, or dare I say, logical thing to do, would be to take out what is essentially a portable armory, ridding Optimus of tons of weapons. He could try to dig at some of the Autobots, but there's no telling how many of them he could get with his driller, if any really, before they all flee at the sight of his driller coming up at them. But by ridding Optimus Prime of his trailer, he's taken out one of the enemy's major advantages. Anyway, after Shockwave has the driller bot re-emerge and rids Optimus of his trailer, he exits it and pursues the Autobots who are just up ahead on foot. Some have questioned as to why he'd do this instead of merely just continuing to chase them in the driller bot. He's doing this so he can pursue the current threat, while the driller bot can continue to search for any other potential threats also hiding in the area. But Blotswave, how do you know this? Well, since Shockwave doesn't speak a language we can understand, we certainly don't get the answer from him. But we do get the answer the next time we see the driller bot after this scene where Shockwave exits it to pursue the Autobots. See, the next time we see the driller bot is when Sam, Carly, Epps, and a team of soldiers have found themselves in a slowly collapsing skyscraper, which they initially entered in order to try to shoot down Sentinel Prime's space bridge control pillar with a rocket. The Decepticons spotted them and started to try and shoot the building down. As the group tries to escape, some debris from the building falls down right past Shockwave, catching his attention and causing him to notice them. Shockwave summons the driller bot, and we watch as it emerges again from the ground. It's doing the same thing as it was before when it came up under the Autobots and knocked Optimus Prime's trailer away from him. It's hiding underground to monitor the surface in case of any other enemies attempting to make their way in. This is why Shockwave left the driller bot earlier, so that he could pursue the present enemy while the driller bot could continue to look for any other enemies that could also be on their way. Anyway, back to the scene of Shockwave going after the Autobots. The Autobots temporarily escape Shockwave by ducking into a nearby building. They know they need to try to escape from him as he's closing in, so they plan a diversion to distract him. That way, not only will they all be able to escape, but Optimus will also be able to circle back around to get his trailer back. For this diversion, the Autobot wreckers face Shockwave directly, launching an all-out attack on him, and we watch as Shockwave takes firepower from all three wreckers head-on. Thinking quickly, Shockwave picks up a nearby car to use as a shield, as the shield on his arm is far too small to take the firepower of three Autobots at once. After a few seconds, he tosses the car aside and blasts the wreckers with his arm cannon, barely even flinching as their firepower rains down on him. This is just one example of how durable he is, but we'll come back to this point in a bit. It will be more relevant to talk about later. So we've already discussed Shockwave's next major scene, where he has the Driller bot go after the Autobot allied human group who are up in the skyscraper, all the while just sitting back and watching as the Driller goes after them. I will add though, since Optimus Prime managed to make it back to his trailer, he flies in with flight tech and weaponry and uses it to kill the Driller bot. In response to watching the Driller bot get killed, Shockwave swiftly takes a single shot at Optimus and nails him, causing Optimus to crash into a nearby building and getting entangled in wires. With a single shot, Shockwave manages to take the Autobot leader out of the fight for a whole 15 minutes. He just continues to keep being super efficient. Alright, now let's discuss his final major fight scenes. So the film reaches a point where the Autobots and their human allies have to make it to Sentinel Prime's space bridge control pillar so they can take it down. This is the only way they can defeat the Decepticons. However, they face a major obstacle: Shockwave. Shockwave knew that a group of Autobots escaped from captivity earlier, and that they'd probably be coming for the control pillar. So he stations himself and a group of Decepticons near the building that Sentinel Prime is on with his control pillar in an effort to guard it. The Autobots and human allies realize that they're now going to have to somehow get through Shockwave and the Decepticons in order to save the world. However, they arrange an attack strategy that Shockwave wouldn't expect, sending the humans out first to start the attack while the Autobots way behind. The Autobots, despite having stronger firepower, are much more massive than the humans, and they have to attack on the ground, making them much more obvious, easier to hit targets. However, some humans silently drop in by air, and hidden snipers take out the eyes of the smaller Decepticons while ground soldiers run out to attach bombs to their legs, crippling them. This catches Shockwave's attention, and while he begins to open fire on the incoming soldiers, one of the paratroopers' parachutes catches his head. Now, I've seen a bunch of people make fun of Shockwave for this because of how he struggles to get a parachute off his head. Which he does, but I just don't find this to be an entirely fair analysis. It's really only caught on his head for just 30 seconds, and yes, while he does struggle to get the parachute off his head, it's not because he's stupid and he can't figure out how to get it off or something. He struggles because he has to defend himself from enemy firepower coming at him from all sides as he's trying to get a giant sheet off his head that's caught around his horn panels. Remember that Shockwave has a shield on the same arm that has really his only hand. Just about every chance he gets to reach up to try to pull the parachute loose, he has to move his arm away and try to block some incoming firepower. If there was hardly anyone shooting at him and he was able to freely use his arm to try to get the parachute off but couldn't, that'd be different. But that's just not what we see here, and it's what a lot of people tend to ignore when they make fun of Shockwave for this. Anyway, shortly after, Shockwave gets a chance to finally get the parachute loose and pulls it off his head. I also would like to point out that we see the human firepower here take out the smaller Decepticons in the area with relative ease, yet all it does to Shockwave all throughout this scene is just kinda knock him around a bit, because that's how much of a unit he is. The only thing that actually harms Shockwave in any serious way here is when all three wreckers turn the corner and all of them fire at Shockwave together with just about everything they've got. All of this concentrated firepower at once would have absolutely demolished just about any other Decepticon. But all it does to Shockwave is merely provide enough force to pop his eye out of its socket, causing it to dangle from his face by its wiring. He then, sensibly, retreats back a ways in order to give himself a chance to assess his current situation and damages. Now, the first time I watched Transformers Dark of the Moon, at this point, I figured that this was it for Shockwave. Typically, very few Decepticons take damage like that and get to keep living. Besides, Shockwave usually gets defeated with relative ease pretty often. In the Generation 1 Transformers show, there were instances where he'd get shot once and get taken out for the rest of the episode. Hell, he even died off screen in the movie. In other shows like Transformers Prime, there'd be times where he'd go down pretty easily, sometimes going down after only being punched in the face once. So surely, he was about to be taken out in this film pretty easily any second now, right? After all, Shockwave had already survived an all-out attack from a whole military squadron specifically trained to kill Decepticons, and had his eye popped out by the concentrated firepower of 3 Autobots at once. Sure, he had shown that he's tougher than most Decepticons, but he typically never gets to last this long. So, Bumblebee or someone was sure to jump in and shoot him in the face and kill him any second now, right? Or at least, that's what I thought. Because, no. That isn't even close to what happens. Much to my surprise and joy, Shockwave doesn't even retreat. He returns to battle and holds his ground, merely trying to pop his eye back into place while continuing to attack the Autobots. Now, there's a misconception that Shockwave is blind now from the wreckers popping his eye out, so him walking back here was just random chance because he couldn't have known where he was if he couldn't see. But this simply isn't true. We know that when Transformers' eyes stop working, they go dim. But that's not what we see here, as Shockwave's eye is very much still lit up. It's dangling from his face, but he can still see out of it. He's just getting a very jiggly view of the ground. He himself made the decision to make his way back to continue the fight despite his injury. There is no taking this guy down. Then we watch as Optimus Prime, the Autobot leader, flies in to deal with Shockwave, tearing his way through the Decepticon soldiers as he makes his way to him. And look at this, Shockwave almost actually takes him out. Even though he doesn't have a clear view anymore, using what around him he can see and hear, he calculates where he'd need to aim and fire in order to hit Optimus. And the best part is, had Optimus not quickly dove over the blast, Shockwave would have nailed him dead center. Even though he's been injured and taken hits from tons of rounds of firepower, the guy still almost manages to take out the leader of the Autobots. Optimus then equips his hand with a spiky metal brass knuckle type weapon and punches Shockwave as hard as he can, taking out a huge chunk of his side. But even this doesn't take Shockwave down. Shockwave actually turns to continue to face Optimus. Optimus quickly punches Shockwave right in the head with his knuckle weapon, causing one of Shockwave's horns to fly off. But it's not until Optimus slams Shockwave into the ground and uses Shockwave's exposed wiring to tear his eye out through his throat that Shockwave is finally defeated and killed. This is my favorite Shockwave defeat ever, and may as well be my favorite defeat of any Transformer ever. I had gotten so used to watching Shockwave get defeated relatively easily most of the time, if on screen at all, so it was so refreshing to watch it take the combined efforts of a military squadron, Autobots, and several blows from the Autobot leader himself to take Shockwave down. It was the Shockwave defeat I had always wanted. Oh, plus the music that went along with this scene was incredible, and I love the way this whole scene was shot. After this, Optimus uses Shockwave's cannon arm to blast down Sentinel's pillar, and then lays Shockwave's dead body aside a moment later to fight Sentinel, who now has to start doing things again now that Shockwave is gone, and can no longer defend his pillar. With Shockwave out of the way, and the pillar going down as a result, things finally start to look up for our heroes, for the most part anyway, as they start to make major gains towards victory at last. What an excellent way to cap off the end of an excellent Shockwave. Now I guess I should address the elephant in the room, that being that Shockwave, my favorite Transformer in this film, doesn't actually ever transform in the movie. He 100% can transform, we just don't see it in the film. Canonically, he transforms into a type of Cybertronian tank, though it seems Hasbro can't decide what this tank looks like. I prefer the original Voyager class tank design myself. It looks more like an actual alternate mode and not so much Shockwave doing really weird yoga. I actually don't have a problem with not getting to see him transform in the film though. Would I have liked to see that? Of course, but the fact that he doesn't bother me, because I don't see when he would have needed to. His tank mode would have aided in faster transportation over walking, but his driller bot provided him all the transportation he needed. Plus, when he's walking in robot mode, it's easier to search for enemies and retaliate than it would be if he were a tank rolling down the street. He also has the same level of firepower in tank mode as he does in robot mode, since we see that in both versions of his tank mode, his cannon arm becomes his tank mode turret. So there isn't a firepower advantage either. There's just really no reason for him to transform in the film, so I'm not bothered by the fact that he doesn't. Even though he dies at the end of Transformers Dark of the Moon, Shockwave still has some relevance and impact in the rest of the franchise, as seen in later films. Actually, to be fair, his relevance in these films technically begins even before Transformers Dark of the Moon. As in the previous film, Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, we see a newspaper for a split second showing Shockwave. Now this is just a fun Easter egg, but if we take it literal, it means that Shockwave has been on Earth for a couple of years before Transformers Dark of the Moon takes place. And if so, what was he doing for these couple of years? Who knows, maybe just waiting for all the Decepticons to station themselves on the moon, hoping to repair Megatron, probably something like that. Anyway though, in Transformers Age of Extinction, he kinda causes that movie to happen in a way as well, since he causes Dark of the Moon to happen, and the fallout of the events in Dark of the Moon play a major role in Age of Extinction. You can also actually see him on one of Harold Attinger's cards, and you can also briefly see him on television during news footage about the Battle of Chicago. Also, one of the types of man-made transformers created by KSI in the film, blandly called Two-Head, were obviously based off of Shockwave, as the Two-Head units are literally just smaller Shockwaves with no cannon arms and, well, two heads. Now, some question why Two-Head would have been created, as the head of KSI, Joshua Joyce, states that he wanted their other creation, Galvatron, to look consumer-friendly, and some have taken this as him wanting all of their creations to appear consumer-friendly. However, he states this in reference to Galvatron only, as Galvatron, unlike Two-Head, is the only one of his kind, and the crown jewel of KSI. Two-Head, on the other hand, is just one of several units they've created, and I gotta say, I think he looks badass. Though I will say it is a bit morally questionable to base one of your robot unit designs off of the Decepticon who practically caused the Battle of Chicago to begin with. Anyway, later in Transformers The Last Night, Vivian Wembley questions Hot Rod about who he is as he takes her to meet Cade Yeager and Edmund Burton at Fulgen Castle, and she asks if he's Shockwave, Soundwave, or just one of the famous ones. Nothing major, of course, but I do think it's neat that the identities of some of the more dangerous Decepticon threats were announced to the public. Also, Decepticon Nitro Zeus not only resembles Shockwave, which we'll touch on in a second, but also he was apparently just like me in the sense that we're both big Shockwave fans. Now this last bit I'll add is just speculation, but the existence of Nitro Zeus seems to suggest to me the existence of Senator Shockwave within the film series, due to the fact that Nitro Zeus's head is very similar to Shockwave's. If you don't know who Senator Shockwave is, it comes from the IDW Transformers comics, where Shockwave was actually a really nice guy before he pissed the wrong people off and was reconstructed as well as having his emotions nullified, changing him into the Shockwave we all know. The process of this reconstruction, though, is called Empurata, and all Transformers who undergo Empurata come out looking very similar to each other, their faces being replaced by blank slates with a single eye in the middle. It's why Shockwave resembles Whirl, for example, since they both underwent this process. The fact that Shockwave and Nitro Zeus look very similar makes me think that maybe Empurata exists in the film series, meaning Senator Shockwave most likely existed in it as well, before becoming the Decepticon Shockwave. This could also explain why Optimus is especially on the edge about Shockwave in the movie as well. We rarely ever see him get this upset by the appearance of any particular Decepticon. And while this is because he knows how deadly Shockwave is, this could also be because he remembers that Shockwave was once his friend before he became the monster he is today, and that he knows he needs to kill him in order to end his reign of destruction and terror, but doesn't want to because he was formerly a friend. Anyway, of course, this is all just speculation that I thought I'd share. I highly doubt it will ever be confirmed to be true, but it is neat to see that the pieces are there regardless. And I kinda have a headcanon that this is all actually true, but that's just me. So I'm sure some of you have probably been wondering why I haven't mentioned the tie-in IDW movie comics at all in this video so far, and that's because I kinda didn't want to. Lots of people who didn't like Shockwave and Dark of the Moon say that these comics, namely Rising Storm, did Shockwave better, and that they improved his character in the film by adding to him. However, I wanted to show you all that Shockwave and Dark of the Moon was great without the need of any outside material, and just go off of what we were shown in the film to prove my point. Plus, I'm not really a fan of tie-in media explaining things that films were too lazy to explain themselves, but I kinda make an exception for these IDW Transformers movie comics. See, unlike some franchises, these tie-in pieces of media don't try to explain major plot points that the movie itself was too lazy to try to explain, but rather just explains small, kinda unimportant things, such as what happened to that one Autobot who had less than a minute of screen time and disappeared between movies. Besides, it's still up for debate about how canon these IDW movie tie-in comics actually are. I mean, hell, for example, Rising Storm is 100% non-canon. We know this because our heroes encounter Shockwave in the comic, yet in Dark of the Moon, Nest has no idea who Shockwave is, and Optimus has to tell them. Also, the comic itself says that it will be continued not by the Dark of the Moon film, but rather the IDW Dark of the Moon comic adaptation, which differs from the film in several ways. That being said, I still think some of these comics, like Rising Storm, are non-canon ways to explain to us canon events. For example, I think it's 100% canon that Shockwave killed Jolt and so on, just not exactly in the way we see it happen in the comics. You know what I mean? Well, that's my interpretation of it anyway, and this is all I really wanted to say about the comics. Well everyone, this has been my big old Dark of the Moon Shockwave defense video. I wanted to show you all how Transformers Dark of the Moon nailed the character of Shockwave, and how he managed to be an incredible, intelligent, resilient, powerful villain who accomplishes so much despite his limited screen time. From causing the movie to happen, to having it take the combined efforts of a military squadron, Autobots, and even the Autobot leader himself to finally take him down in the end. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if I changed your mind on Dark of the Moon Shockwave for the better, again, please let me know because it will actually make my day. However, if I somehow still didn't change your mind on him, then I hope you at least understand where I'm coming from when I say that I love Dark of the Moon Shockwave. In the meantime, this video is one that I was really passionate about, and while it was rather lengthy, I thank you all for sticking around for this long, and of course, thank you for watching as well.